Okay, let's take a lot of what we've learned from some of the other videos and combine it all into trying to play a very, very quick, a very simple turn of the Roots of Magic, a game round. I'm not going to use every single ability possible. I'm not going to concentrate too hard on trying to figure out what is the perfect set of actions, but I'm going to take a number of actions to give you a good idea of how it will go. Okay, so models at the beginning of a game round, before initiative is rolled, generate mundane actions. So each model will generate 3. And I'll just place them down, so bear with me. And 3, because these models are both wizards, as we discussed in a previous video. In addition, both models are within 6 of a friendly nexus point, and being wizards, they will gain 1 for owning a source stone or greater source stone. And because of their proximity to a friendly nexus marker, they will generate an additional 2 actions. Now, in this particular video, we've also placed an objective counter. Now, this is the objective counter called the Orb of Ranellos from the scenario The Orb of Ranellos. We'll also add that to this particular game just to give you an idea of how scenarios could add another element of depth and tactical complexity to the game. I'll discuss how it could be interacted and what kind of bonuses and penalties it will give in play. So, both models have generated all of the actions that were appropriate for where their position is this turn. Now it's time to roll the initiative roll. Firstly, Luther Draxos scores a 7, and Hephaestus Zant scores a 3. So in this case, Luther Draxos has the highest value and must go first. Wizards are very, very vain individuals, and they never allow rivals to go before them if they can avoid it. So, Luther Draxos is going to spend 1 action to move into base contact, and I always use mundane actions first because these actions replenish, and it's just a good habit to get yourself into, using the actions that always replenish first and trying to make sure that you save these for the time that you need them the most. So he can move up to 3 inches, and that's easily enough to put himself into base contact with the scenario objective marker. Now, he can't end on the objective marker, but he can move over it if he wants to. He's just not allowed to end on it. At that point, he's then going to interact. Now, interact is another universal action, just like walking, and it costs usually 1 action, but it will specify for the scenario. In this case, it's 1 action. What that immediately does is repels the objective piece, because it's considered to be a floating orb of etheric energy, and it sends it via repel directly away, so this direction, up to 5 inches. Now, it will stop in base contact with any model, any wizard specifically that it hits. Anything else it hits, whether it's a non-wizard model or a piece of terrain, it will then immediately teleport off 5 inches. For the player that didn't take the action, makes the choice. So you've got to be very careful where you would send the objective point piece, because your opponent could easily move it away if you're not very careful. Now, if it hits a wizard, it's called pipping the ace. Pipping the ace means that you have basically shamed or embarrassed your opponent by hitting them in a sensitive area, or hitting them at all if they think they're very skillful with the orb. It's considered to be bad form for a wizard to allow themselves to be hit by it. That would immediately give Luther Draxos a objective point, which he will take, and on top of that, through sheer shame, the opposing wizard will take a point of damage of embarrassment. Wizards do not like to be embarrassed in front of potentially any onlookers that are watching the duel. Okay. Now, Luther has 1 mundane action and 3 power tokens, 3 magical action points left. He can choose to end his turn right here because he's done a little bit of damage, he's scored an objective point, he's building up his actions, but it's always a wise choice to use any number of mundane actions, even if you're not that keen to spend the power tokens, because you want to save them for another turn. So Luther will spend his last one to gain a concentration token, which I'll place by him. And again, as I said in other videos, you can use any number of means to do the bookkeeping in this game, but for visual purposes I'm going to have a token for every different thing. And Luther will stick on 3 power tokens. The turn is then passed over once Luther is completed to the next eligible model to be selected by the opposing player, which again is me in this case, and it will be Hephaestus Zant of House Merk. Now, Hephaestus Zant also has 6 actions which he could potentially use. And he might want to do a range of things. He doesn't need to walk around to use the orb, because the orb is unfortunately stuck to his face, crotch, any embarrassing area you want to consider, that's where it could be. So, because turnabout is a very fair thing, Hephaestus Zant is going to spend 1 to interact with the Orb of Ranullos and send it careening back from whence it came. And again it will stop in contact with Luther Draxos, applying a point of damage and giving Hephaestus Zant an objective point. So everything's even at this point. Now, you cannot score a second scenario point or objective point in the same game round via this particular scenario anyway, so Zant has to think of other things to do. You can't just keep on hitting him in the face with the Orb of Ranullos. But Zant has a number of other tricks he wants to use, or he can use, in order to maybe sneak a victory and maybe prevent his opponent from hitting him back on a subsequent turn. He is going to first concentrate for 1 action. Now, let me find another token to use for the second concentration point. There we go. So I've got it marked down in the same way. He will then spend 3 actions, so the remaining mundane action point, and 2 of the power tokens, spending 3 to cast an ability. Now, as we discussed, abilities can only be cast once per turn per ability. So if this doesn't work, he won't be able to do it again, even though he couldn't do it again anyway, because he certainly doesn't have the power left to pay for the action. He's also going to use the concentration point to add 2 dice to the casting attempt. Now, as this is an ability, it's got a target number. The target number of this particular spell, called Hidden Secrets, is target number X. And X is equal to the willpower, the will characteristic of the opposing wizard. Now, Luther's will is usually 7, which means the target number would be 7. But Zant has a keyword called disturbing, which means any models within 8 of him, any enemy models within 8 of him, suffer a -1 penalty to their will characteristic. So in this case, it's 6 for Luther. And so the target number of this spell will be 6. Usually you're given 1 dice to get that, but I've concentrated and I've used the concentration to add 2 dice. Now, for an ability, if any one of these dice manages to roll a 6 or better, then the ability is a success. Unlike attacks, there is no bonuses to rolling more successes. It just increases the possibility, the chance that a success will occur for ability. So I have a 6, a 9 and a 7. They all hit effectively, you all met the target, but it doesn't really matter which one I choose. Only one of them forces it to go off. So now that's been a success, I apply the effects. The effects applied are Shackle 2. Now, Shackled is a condition in the game, usually associated with House Smirk, but there are a couple of other models that might have access to it, in which you apply that condition to a model until the next time they activate. Now, the next time that Luther activates, which would be in another game round, the next game round, he would have to pay a tax in actions equal to the shackle value that's on the model. So in this case, if Luther were to activate on the next round, he would immediately, before he has a chance to take any action, have to spend 2 of his actions to remove this penalty in order to continue activating in any other way. So that would be 2 mundane actions, almost always. If there was anything that prevented you from generating mundane actions, it would take 2 power tokens. And if you couldn't pay the tax or the cost in Shackle, then you pay what you can and the remainder stays on you, and it will affect you on your next activation. So Shackle is supposed to represent in the game that Zant is making Luther Draxos fight off the demons of his past. He's making him fight himself. He is distracting him using illusions and all manner of horrible, fearful sights, which will debuff his action limit for the next turn, and allow Zant to gain action dominance and hopefully make that count by doing more damage or applying more effects or getting the orb again without his opponent being able to do it. So at this point, Zant has one action left that he can use, but he doesn't really have a lot he can do with one, especially at this range, because Zant is more of a longer range caster. So he's going to stay on one action, power token rather, which he'll be able to keep for the next round. So at the end of a game round, there's something called the maintenance phase, in which you look at all the effects in play and see if any of them reduce themselves, and in this case it doesn't, so the game round is completely over. Both models have scored an objective point, both models have taken some damage, and in the case of Luther, he has some rather nasty conditions put upon himself which will impair his ability to make use of the extra actions that he saved. And that is a very, very quick round of the Roots of Magic between Hephaestus Zant and Luther Draxos.